And we're live.
Yay, live. Well, Ben, welcome to In Lieu of Fun, where because of the coronavirus, we sit at home and don't go and see our friends or have fun. And so in lieu of fun, we bring our friends to you via the magic of the internet. In what some have described as a mix between improv, Wikipedia, and a dinner party. And I would also, as this endeavor marches on, I would also hasten to say like a USO show. You're like Bob Hope, and I'm like, I don't know who was in the USO. That was a woman. I'll also be Bob Hope.
Yeah, as long as I don't have to be Al Franken.
Oh God, that's right.
Wasn't that in an Al Frank in a USO show?
Yes, it totally was. That is our guest. Do you want me to
hang on? I got it.
Okay. So anyways, yeah, we're like the USO, and I would love it if you could introduce our guest.
I will introduce our guest as soon as she successfully manages to get on the Zoom link. Hang on just a second. I am texting her the URL. She's having a little bit of trouble getting in. There we go. All right, now let's see if she shows up. So Kori Schake is one of my dearest friends in Washington. I met her when she was, I guess, right after she left the Bush administration's NSC. She was then at State Department for a while. She'd been a Defense Department official, and she later was the Defense and Foreign Policy voice of the John McCain campaign. And she's been at the Hoover Institution and IISS in London for the last several years, and is recently took over as the head of foreign and defense policy at the American Enterprise Institute. She is also, I don't know just quite how to say this, because it's like in a Mike Pesca kind of way.
We're talking about you behind your back, Kori.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
So like Mike Pesca.
I clearly came in right at the crucial moment where Ben was about to say something terrible about me, and I cannot reclaim it.
I was going to say something
great
lovely about
credentials, but some people think.
I was going to say something lovely about you, except that when, for some reason, when Mike Pesca says it about himself, it comes off differently than it will come off. But I mean it exactly the way Mike Pesca meant it yesterday. Kori can find the bright side of any situation. And in the post-apocalyptic hellscape of a coronavirus infested America led by Donald Trump, she can tell us what the ray of sunshine is. So that is, and I think the only real way to appreciate, Kori also gave me the best professional advice I have ever received from anybody ever, and which I pass on to all Brookings interns who come to me for advice. And so with that, I'll just say, Kori, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, it is super good to have you with us.
It is such a pleasure to be talking with the two of you and to be having a glass of wine in your virtual company.
Yes, it is lovely.
So tell us the bright side. Trump infested coronavirus-led America, but the other way around, we're living in a out of control pandemic, and our fearless leader is Donald Trump. What is the bright side?
We have a federal system where governors are in control of most of what needs doing to preserve people's health and safety, would be my first silver lining. My second silver lining would be just how vigorous civil society is as a factor in American life now and always. My third silver lining would be, it's really beautiful to see how Americans are looking after each other, and the emergence of practices like red, yellow, and green paper in the windows of people who are elderly or immunocompromised, so that we know when people need help and can offer it. Even little stuff like the construction crew working across the street is considerate enough that when I tell them, but I have to do my job too, could you please not saw bricks between 2:30 and 4:30? They're actually nice enough to do that.
Yeah, I actually had a moment in college when I went on a Saturday morning, there was a construction crew outside my thing, and I went outside and my roommates thought I was insane. I just said, do you mind not doing that right now? Like, do you know what's morning? And they were like, you didn't call the cops or didn't think? I was like, no, they're like reasonable people. They're just sawing stuff. They can do it down the street. And so
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And you know, the voluntary way people have been responsive to the stay-at-home orders is actually pretty amazing. For a country full of crazy people that are barely governable, it's actually really beautiful to see how well people are doing things that are for the common good.
All right. So I want to ask, like, we were talking yesterday with Virginia Heffernan and Mike Pesca about kind of how optimistic they're capable of being, how cheerful their dispositions. Virginia's been reading a lot of plague literature. She's been thinking about whether maybe we should all be this is really about the triumph of the human gut and the sort of microbiome. And Pesca just seems to wake up with a smile on his face every day. Like he can be kind of angry sometimes on his monologues, but his demeanor seems like he's actually waking up every morning and having a pretty good time with life. How's your mood?
Well, crazily enough, I feel like I am ideally suited to being cloistered, right? Because this is sort of my ideal work setting. I can read and write uninterrupted. I can't be forced to do meetings that aren't a good use of my time. I can do a lot of stuff by email. And I actually crave solitude. And I have a good excuse to run in the sunshine in the middle of the day. So I'm holding up reasonably well. One thing I did notice, though, is that I had started reading the third and final of Hilary Mantel's magnificent trilogy about Thomas Cromwell. And I actually had to put it aside because the undercurrent of dread, he's an older man at the height of his power and influence, and he's making the decisions that are going to lead to his execution and reflecting on them. And it just added too much enervation. So I'm on a steady diet of happy endings because I really can't take Thomas Cromwell's decline right now.
Okay, but the worst thing that's going on for you in coronavirus is that you're deferring reading Hilary Mantel for a while?
It is a great blessing that's the extent of my experience of it. That and the guilt dragging along behind me like a string of tin cans about how much that needs doing in the country that we haven't done. And that if we had done, 16,000 Americans might not be dead now.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that like what you talk about this idea of like, yeah, the worst thing that is like, this is like these small things that are going on for me. I was thinking how much I have like stockpiled all this like kind of gourmet food or things that are in my apartment that we left our apartment 4 weeks ago. And like, I was like, man, I should have brought my preserved lemons. What a loss. Instantly I'm like, wow, Kate, get some freaking perspective. Didn't have time to think about preserved lemons. It's like it's actually just a very zen like opportunity to kind of grasp the important things in life.
So I'm having the same realization when I read about the anxiety that school children have if they're from poorer families and they're being required to do video meetings that show their home circumstances to all of their classmates, or the number of kids who don't have internet connections or don't have 3 computers so everybody in the family could be working at the same time.
Or the people who are in domestic violence situations.
Yes, trapped with somebody who's a danger to them. It's such a reminder of the need to take better care of each other.
Yeah.
All right, so if you want to get in on the conversation, we are being troll bombed again today. So feel free to demonstrate that you are a real person in the Q&A and have an actual question for Kori Schake rather than just accusing her of being a Jew, which, by the way, she is not. Feel free to leave a question, and we will rapture you into the conversation magically.
What a perfect thing to say as we approach. Yeah.
Yes. Apparently you have fans that say they would let you. They would take you in.
Yes, Maggie Feldman Pilch says it's also you'd be welcome in the tribe.
I'm very grateful for that, Maggie. Thank you, my friend.
So feel free to come on into the conversation. I want to ask you, Kori, because one of the things you are in your real life is a civilian military relations analyst and scholar and thought leader. And so let's talk about the Teddy Roosevelt. Like, I've heard a bunch of versions of how I should think about this, but I want to hear your version. Is this a situation where a captain simply did the right thing, got removed because the political echelon was behaving inappropriately, or is there a little bit more to it in the sense that there was a kind of element of going or semi-going public in the face of the chain of command that may have been the right thing to do, but also may justify his removal at the same time?
Yeah, I do think it is more complicated than the first narrative that you laid out. And it's actually a really good way to understand the responsibility at different echelons of command in the military, because every commander has to make a decision about whether they persevere to accomplish their mission when the losses of their personnel begin to mount, right? Historically, at about 25 to 30% casualties, most military units break and are not combat effective. And I think that—
Is that total? Or, I mean, so that's total. Like, that's like, if ever, like, once you've hit that number of total, like, casualties.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about why certain military units from the Civil War are so highly lauded by other soldiers, it's keeping combat capability amidst enormous attrition. I worked for a really great American, an Army general by the name of Barry McCaffrey. And he once told me that there's nothing so democratic as persuading soldiers to take a hill. right? Because they actually have to keep walking towards fire. What it looks to me like what's going on the Teddy Roosevelt was that they were, the captain was doing what was good for his men and women, and echelons above him made a different judgment. Made a judgment that even though what they were experiencing was extraordinarily dangerous, that the mission was still more important, and that they didn't want to take one of the 10 aircraft carriers in the American Armada that was headed to the Western Pacific out of the game at a time where America's adversaries might be tempted to try and invade an ally, challenge the rule of law. That's a normal tension between a battle commander and a higher headquarters. And so that's a perfectly normal sort of friction. Where this becomes abnormal is the comportment of the acting Secretary of the Navy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, he doesn't just remove the guy; he shows up on his ship and gives a kind of attack on him speech. How do you understand his behavior in that moment?
Well, I think there are several suboptimal things going on here. The first is, fair enough if he felt the need to relieve the commander of the carrier, but there are better and worse ways to do that. And a guy who has engendered that amount of loyalty in the people he's commanding, the Navy might still have good uses for him. And so instead of flamboyantly, publicly removing him, quietly pulling him back to Washington and telling him, a year from now, there's going to be another command opportunity for you. But in the moment, we need somebody who's going to demand more of the crew than you were demanding. Right? That would be a graceful way to do that. That is, of course, not the way the acting Secretary of the Navy did it. And the things he said about the commander were outrageous. The acting Secretary of the Navy seemed not to understand that most sailors distrust the suits at the top of the organization, and they're much more comfortable with the uniforms that they have experience with day to day. And you can hear that in commentary by the sailors of the Teddy Roosevelt in the audio of the speech that this acting Secretary of the Navy was giving. It's just terrible leadership. And in an institution that runs on leadership, to have flown out there. By the way, as Dr. Tamarowit has pointed out, how many sailors from the Teddy Roosevelt could have been treated and safely housed on the $250,000 that the acting Secretary of the Navy spent to fly out to talk over a PA system to the sailors of the Teddy Roosevelt? He just kept making it worse and kept making it worse. And so I'm really pleased that he was relieved. I think it sends the right kind of message to the women and men of the American Navy.
Okay.
Just to be, I know I haven't, I'm like, this is really bad, but what happened with the USS Teddy Roosevelt? I'm quickly trying to Google this. And I'm not quite, it feels more complicated than it immediately, but I'm getting.
I'll be happy to answer that question, Kate.
Oh, please do.
So what happened was there was concern about a possible outbreak of the coronavirus on an aircraft carrier.
Oh, okay.
Which has 4,000 people aboard it, living in very close quarters where there's no possibility of social distancing.
Right.
The commander of the Teddy Roosevelt, after some back and forth with the leadership, sent to about 40 recipients an anguished, heartfelt letter saying that he wasn't getting the support that the women and men of the Roosevelt needed. And he had to know when he did that, he was going to be relieved, right? Anybody with any experience in the Navy would know they would be relieved over that. And it felt worth it to him. So when he was relieved by the acting secretary of the Navy, he was cheered off the ship by his sailors.
Yeah, cool.
And the Navy subsequently has done what he asked them to do, which is take the ship out of commission, quarantine people, and get them treatment. And the acting secretary of the Navy didn't just relieve him, he wrote a long letter that he widely circulated, basically calling him a coward for not persevering in the mission. And then he flew to the Teddy Roosevelt and actually called him a coward, said he was either naive or stupid to have not expected his letter to leak, proving that the acting secretary of the Navy, talking to 4,000 people, all of whom had cell phones and would be recording this, was either naive or stupid to think that people loyal to their commander wouldn't stand up for him. The Secretary of Defense made him apologize and then relieved him. And because there was an outcry in Congress, there was an outcry from the Navy community about what the hell kind of leadership is this?
So who's in charge of the boat now? Sorry. I was keeping track as you were talking, Kori. I'm like, okay, first guy's relieved, second guy's relieved. Now who's in charge?
The commander of an aircraft carrier is always somebody who flies airplanes, not somebody who sails ships.
Yeah.
Because the hardest piece of
is landing
a carrier
off an airplane from an aircraft carrier.
Exactly, that's lurching on an open sea.
Yeah.
But the aircraft commander's boss is also aboard the carrier, the task force commander.
Got it.
And that admiral took over command.
Cool, thank you.
So
sorry, sorry for the explainer need.
No, it's wonderful that you care to understand it. Thrills me.
So we have a question from an anonymous attendee, and we don't bring anonymous attendees on to speak because then they turn out to be trolls. But the question's an interesting one. Person writes, quote, super cool to realize right now that our whole government has been just on the honor system for centuries. Kumail Nanjiani on Twitter.
Who's this?
The
who's
person
discovering legal realism, apparently.
Person writes, this strikes me as insightful, and I'd suggest that applies more or less universally. Any reflections on that?
I would love to hear what both of you have to say.
Actually, I was just going to say that. I want to hear what Kate and Ben have to say about this.
Ben, you start.
Well, you first.
No, you first.
So I think there's a lot of truth to it. So look, there are a lot of laws, and there's a certain amount of constitutional fabric, the most relevant of which is structural separation of powers. But at the end of the day, the amount of discretion vested in executive officers, particularly the higher you go, is so extraordinary. And by the way, that's not a creature of the American system. That's an inherent feature of executive authority, which is, if you say the executive has the authority to hold this glass, you're assuming hold means decide to hold on to, not also has the authority to throw it against a wall or drop it. But that's inherent in the grant of authority to hold, right? Is the grant of authority not to hold or to throw or to crush against your forehead. And, we don't spend enough time, but if we did spend enough time, we still couldn't spend enough time because it's undoable. The human imagination is vast, thinking about all the different ways for a crazy person or a stupid person to interpret or misinterpret or abuse grants of authority. And so I think at some level, there is an honor system, and it's called in the Constitution the Take Care Clause or the Oath of Office, right? Where we basically have these catch-alls that says, okay, the president has to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. He's got to swear an oath. And by the way, all the other executive officers swear an oath too, to kind of do their best. And that's the formal articulation of what this questioner refers to as the honor system. It's real, and you don't see it as long as we're talking about a window of human behavior that is from kind of Bill Clinton to George H.W. Bush to Barack Obama to George W. Bush, all of whom are basically psychologically normal individuals. They have their flaws, but they're well short of deranged or demonic or disordered
the ways
personality.
in which they are predictable and predictable. I think that's like really like they're self-serving, power-hungry people. That's why they ran for office.
Egomaniacs. Like it selects for a kind of person with a very healthy ego. But if you listen to George W. Bush, what has George W. Bush done since leaving office?
He's really good at painting now.
He's spent time painting pictures of people who died under his orders, right? That is a really psychologically healthy response for a president who ordered the Iraq War.
The thing I like best. Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the best.
I think it's like you can't possibly imagine Donald Trump doing that. And so I guess I think, yeah, of course there's an honor system, and there's only ultimately two real checks on the honor system. One is the impeachment process, and the other is elections. One of them failed us, and the other, bring it on, because that's the one we got. What do you all think?
I'm just I kind of telescope all the way out on this type of thing. And so right now I'm thinking about your idea of the oath, which was the take care clause.
Yeah.
So that's like the take care clause applies to government. And I would say the Hippocratic Oath applies to doctors. And I would say that you have reasonable person standards that are effectuated by legal systems. The thing is that all of those things are actually very subjective determinations that are masked as objective determinations, and that people have to make those thoughts. And we hope that what do no harm means to us is the same thing that it means to the person who's holding up that thing. That take care means the same thing to us as it does to other people. And that sameness is the idea that we're all bound by the same social norm, or if you want to be super kind of go a little bit deeper about it, the same moral fabric or the same value structure. But I would say social norms about kind of at a broad level about what is and is not appropriate in a given situation, and what the right thing and the wrong thing to do is. But I think that that point is exactly right. But I think that there was a point that I realized that in college or right after college, one of my first couple of jobs, where I was like, oh, these are just people pretending to be the adults in the same way that I'm pretending to be an adult. They don't know anything more than I know. And I think that having but it's the same kind of thing that we talked about yesterday with nihilism, which was kind of well, you get to that conclusion, and the conclusion is, well, nihilism is boring. And so it's not very productive to say nobody has authority, you can't respect any authority, everything falls apart. So you agree to do it because it keeps everything together and moving, even though it's not always in the direction that you wanted. And I think that that honestly is the principles versus outcomes moment that we're having with our own government, which is like, okay, like if we can't agree on the outcomes and we can't agree on the principles, like that's where we're running, like where we're running into problems. Whereas I feel like at least before, when we had kind of bipartisan clashes, that there were kind of certain things that we could agree on what the words meant: good governance, or, you know, or fairness, or transparency, or truth. Like that there could be some type of agreement. And now that's kind of slowly fallen apart. And both the outcomes of where those principles land, like, is like people want two different things, but they can't even agree on the principles to begin with.
Kori,
So
you served.
one of the things I learned reading a really wonderful book called Unmaking the Presidency.
Yeah, I know. Am I like sounding a little bit like I'm like parroting somebody else?
It's a wonderful book.
Thank you, Kori.
It's just terrific. And I hadn't realized until I read the careful delineation by Susan Hennessy and Ben Wittes about all of the ways in which the president is traducing norms of behavior, just how much those norms have been the guardrails of democracy in America. And I myself am mystified that President Trump, who he and the people around him have been so ruthlessly creative in ways to use executive power to outright challenge long-standing constitutional practices, like you can't use money for border enforcement that has been authorized and appropriated by the Congress for other defense purposes. It's so strange to me that somebody like Donald Trump, who aspires to an imperial presidency, is actually not exercising any of his existing normative or executive powers in the first crisis of his presidency, and when over 16,000 Americans have already died. It's really shocking that he is retreating from the imperial presidency at precisely the moment when it would be most useful for the preservation of life and security for Americans.
I can explain that, actually.
Please do.
I think I can explain that. So the one thing the imperial presidency cannot relieve you of is accountability. Because
that's a nice point.
If you hoard authority and you, over time, whether you think of it as a usurpation by the executive or a ceding of the authority by Congress, or both, and I think it's mostly the second category, but whatever it is, it makes it very clear who's responsible for outcomes. And so the current crisis puts Trump in a very tricky position for him. He wants the trappings of all the authority, but in his lizard brain way, he knows that Joe Biden is more popular than he is, that he's got to face an electorate in less than 8 months or 7 months, and that we're having a 9/11 level of death every few days. And so if you actually embrace the imperial presidency here and you become Boris Johnson, or, you know, I don't mean that in the sense of being sick, I mean it in the sense of having a state of emergency that really gives you a lot of authority, right? If you really do that, how are you going to not be accountable for the death toll at the end of the day? And so I think his equivocation is a reflection of he wants to enrobe himself in all this apparent power, but he doesn't want the accountability that comes with the power. And so you end up with this very equivocal relationship with the authorities of his office, whereby he'll announce that he's invoking the Defense Production Act, but he doesn't actually use the Defense Production Act, right? And he announces, that he can do all these things, but he doesn't actually do them.
It's so interesting that you raised that, Ben, because what I noticed about the president's comportment in office early on, and I haven't thought about this in a while, was that he was banking on his voters listening to what he said he was doing, not what he actually did. And when he didn't follow through on all sorts of things that require actual orchestration of the levers of governance, that he was banking on American voters not doubling back to see what happened. And you're right, there's no way to avoid the accountability that comes with more than 16,000 dead Americans, and the clear comparison to other governments that took action earlier, that behaved more responsibly, that flowed information and resources to where their population most needed it. All of those failures of the Trump administration, I think, are going to be unavoidable.
So we have a question from Maggie Feldman Pilch, who is the founding entrepreneurial guru of the NatSec Girl Squad, which, by the way, is doing a whole lot of really cool programming on Zoom and online while we are all in our viral cocoons. Maggie, what's on your mind?
Hello, my rainbow unicorn friend.
Hello. And I have to say that, I was doing what every good millennial Jew is doing right now, which is making sure that the house is still kosher while wearing my literal tiara of optimism. The shame that the video doesn't work in webinar, Ben. But this is great. This is such like it's the perfect way to end the day with you guys. So my question is something that I've asked you before, but I think it bears re-asking and is a really interesting conversation with the two other people on this show. And sometimes you mention this example of small or relatively small policy choices that can be made that trickle up, right, instead of trickling down. And you cite this example of when the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, I think, made the decision.
I love that example.
It's such a great example, right? Like they shared the daily pollution numbers and the rest sort of took care of itself. And so especially with everything going on in the Navy right now and everything going on everywhere, I wonder, are there kind of specific little nuggets of whatever you want to call those little tweaks that you think would trickle up really well?
It's a great question.
That's a great question.
So let's, Kori, what's a little nudge that you would give to the coronavirus world? And Kate, what's a little nudge you would give to the coronavirus world?
So I think I see a few really wonderful ones already. I mentioned the red, yellow, green paper in people's windows. The fact that every grocery store now has early opening hours for seniors, the people who are most at risk of the consequences of coronavirus, for them to be able to shop without the rest of us. That what would I like to see that I'm not seeing? I would like to see, actually, one more thing I think I am seeing. I think boring competence is coming roaring back into fashion because, even the Wall Street Journal editorial page thinks the president's daily press conferences are bad for the country and thinks that the president should instead let people who know what they're talking about provide reliable information to the American public for navigating these difficult, dangerous days. And when a Republican president has lost the Wall Street Journal editorial board, I feel like that's the start of a big change. And so the accountability, that governors have tends to make them better executives for the country. So what I would love to see is a return to boring competence and a return to governors who've actually had to balance a budget every year, provide health care to the citizens of their states, resurge to be the national leaders of the country, because I think their expertise is much more suited to the job of running the country. That said, there's not one still in contention for 2020. And so this is a long-term project.
How about you, Kate? Do you have a small nudge to the system that a policy nudge that would trickle up?
Yeah. My policy nudge is that if you still have a job, you still spend money. Like, you don't sit on your gold and like a dragon on like smog on like his pile of gold coins, right? Like, my parents called me the other day and were like, this is so great, we're eating in all the time and we're not spending money. And I was like, screw you, you both have like permanent pensions and you're fine. Go out and spend money, for crying out loud. I mean, like, they do, like, and I have a job and my partner has a job, and it's going to keep paying at least for the foreseeable future. I'm not going to say we're reckless. We have savings already that are liquid and not in the stock market. So we're like safe-ish. But like, I think that it's your responsibility to go out and give $20 tips to the bag guy handing you your bag through the window.
Not agree more.
Well, here.
I could not agree more. I think that, like, you know, the central bipartisan position is that the federal government is going to keep as many Americans whole as possible for the next several months. And I think the social contract of that is that all of us who are whole, and, you know, the Brookings Institution, we're running remotely, right? Tammy and I are both employed. We should, you know, not cut off our gym memberships, not cut off any of the things we're spending money on. We should keep paying contractors who do work for us, even though they're not. And
they're not doing the work, with the idea that at some point it'll get made up or something will happen. But like, yes, even if it doesn't, you've preserved the industry for these people and kept them alive and kept them healthy and safe so they can come back at some point. Like,
right.
I think that is so wonderful and so patriotic and a great example of civil society doing what Americans need to have done.
But it's also just Keynesianism, right? If you believe, and we
don't
seem
tell
to
people
all
that, then no one's going to listen to me.
No, but if we're all Keynesians now, right, which we all seem to be, at least in these emergency situations, the idea is we should all be spending the money that we can spend. Keep people in living their financial lives. And it's not charity. It's actually exactly what the federal government is doing with respect to 6.6 million people a week who are, and so I'm not saying we should like pay somebody's whole salary or something, but if you have a service that you have used and you have a relationship with that entity, that business, that person, don't cut it off.
I was going to say too, this is almost like we have an ability, because of the current moment of technology and the frictionlessness of passing money between individuals, and it doesn't have to be in cash. It can be, and it doesn't have to be in credit cards. Like, now we have PayPal and Venmo and all of these different structures. I was thinking about my stimulus check, which I'm not going to use or save, that I'm going to like put out, and how I wanted. I was like, I wonder what a good way to redistribute this is. And I was like doing some research. And then I was like, I'm just going to redistribute this and like giving it away to all of the services and all of the restaurants and all of the service people, like individually, that I would have spent that money on.
What a beautiful thing to do.
What?
I know what
a beautiful thing to do.
I know what you should do with your stimulus check. You should get Yorick. You should pay Yorick.
I have an 8:30 meeting with Yorick today.
You should pay Yorick to do a series of Zoom in lieu of fun martial arts training
with Zurich.
Yeah.
Yorick, by the way, Kori, Yorick is my the name of my striking trainer who I used to do boxing with, and he's a wannabe like ultimate fighter, and he has funny terms for things, like he describes our workout sessions as "Yo, let's do violence." And like, texting that like in the middle of the day, and Ben loved this, and so like also that his name was Yorick, which is just like a little bit too perfect, and he wears
Alas poor.
exactly.
Yes.
He wears this big. He's like this white kid, and all of his siblings are named like Becky and like Susan, and like Bob. And his parents named him Yorick for some reason. He's like the middle child. It makes no sense. But anyways, he's a funny character.
I have a policy nudge.
What's yours, Ben?
So I have been spending a lot of time of the last couple weeks with my younger child, who has been doing 3D printing of masks. And he's been trying to perfect a face mask that is actually really useful and pretty comfortable. And I have been struck by the fact that of all the information that has been put out, the FDA has an FAQ about 3D printing PPE, and the CDC has some information. What they have not put out is a prototype. And
really?
You know, yeah, they have all these warnings about like, you know, here are the reasons why 3D printed PPE may be, you know, not good for hospitals. You have to be careful about this. You have to be careful about that. And it seemed to me, if the FDA and the CDC wanted to do something really valuable here and unleash a lot of people to do good, what they would do is they would work with one of the manufacturers to open source a design and a filament spec, like the type of material that you're working with, that would actually produce something that hospitals could use. There are a lot of people around the country with 3D printers. There is no shortage of the filament materials, including some of the more esoteric rubbery ones. And I don't see why, with a small amount of work, the FDA couldn't say, hey, here are a set of specs which you can download and print yourself that are presumptively, absent some deficiency in them, acceptable for emergency hospital use in a pinch.
It's a great idea, Ben.
I don't know. I think like it's
has anyone done that open source? The CDC just like hasn't like signed on to it, or like is there something out there that exists like that?
Well, there's a lot of designs that are out there, and some of them are, by the way, spectacular. Like there's this guy in Spain who, I think under contract from the Spanish health authorities, designed a very simple mask that can hold an N95 filter. But like when I look at it, I say, well, okay, if you showed up with 100 of these at a hospital, is that actually useful for them? Or do they look at it and say, this is not, you know, FDA approved material. It's made by somebody in their garage. We don't know what we can do with it.
But you could give them away at grocery stores, or you could give them away at other types of places to citizens.
I mean, that's what we're going to do. We're going to print. Yeah. We're going to print a bunch of them, and we're going to give them away. But I do think with a little bit of federal guidance, you could have people printing stuff that was actually useful in emergency medical situations, which I don't think you can do now. The trick is you have to have an answer to the question, what are the minimum specs that a hospital or an EMT team actually needs? And I don't think anybody other than the federal government can give that.
So Ernest May, the great Harvard historian, who was on the 9/11 Commission, once told me that the biggest mistake the American government made in the aftermath of 9/11 was not trusting the American people to be partners in everything that needed doing. And
That's a beautiful thought.
yeah, that like, instead of saying the FBI's got this or Homeland Security's got this, or that trusting that, particularly in free societies, trusting the public to be a partner in whatever needs doing. And Ben, you just gave me a great example of how they could do that. So thank you for that.
I mean, I think they probably won't, because, you know, when the FDA clears a medical device, it's like a medical device produced by a particular manufacturer in a particular factory, everything subject to inspection. And I understand their instinct to want that level of specificity, but we have a national shortage of masks.
Right.
And there is some minimum condition of a mask.
As they say in the United States Air Force, if the minimum wasn't good enough, it wouldn't be the minimum.
Exactly. Right? I want to produce the worst mask I can produce and still be useful.
Right.
And
hey, I have seen somebody pop up on the I think it's the question screen, and it's the great Matthew Saville.
It is the great Matthew Saville, and he has a great question. So Matthew, let's unmute you and have you pose your question.
Yeah, hi. Slightly
And
embarrassing to be called great.
Hello, my friend.
Hello, very good to see you, Kori. Settled back in the UK. You'll be pleased to know that we've had weather slightly above what you would regard as sub-zero in the past 48 hours.
It's an uninhabitable country, let's be honest.
This is an outrage and a slander, but I think we had that debate a couple of hundred years ago. Yes, sorry, I'm a sort of one of these terrible sort of official types over in the UK. Although I've been on a course.
He is the excellence that bureaucracy can produce of genuine, deep knowledge focused on urgent public policy problems.
Well, put far more eloquently and indeed more praiseworthily than I could have done. It's a slightly political question, but hopefully asked neutrally, which is, as a sort of an amateur student of US politics, it's often seen as a fairly sort of cynical business, and that, if you like, personal interests will often trump party loyalty. We've just had a couple of years of very interesting British politics where party discipline has broken down, and yet looking over at the US system at the moment, you were talking about the sort of the norms that your book talks about the president trampling over. It seems that with each new norm that is crossed or interest that is imperiled, actually what happens is the Republican leadership doubles down, and that seems counterintuitive. And we've had recent examples where you would have thought, Republican core interests about national security and the health of the military would really have triggered a response. And yet throughout the hearings, sort of serious, hardcore national security professionals, people with unimpeachable, pardon the pun, credentials like Fiona Hill, were then attacked by Republicans. And the question is, why is this president, who is an outsider in his party, able to instill this kind of weird form of party discipline, with some very odd exceptions, like how he handles Saudi Arabia?
Ben Wittes, that is your wheelhouse, my friend.
It's my wheelhouse, with the caveat that I have no idea what the answer is. And I find myself, I was bewildered by it in 2016 during the campaign. I was really bewildered by it in 2017 when the president, newly installed, took a series of actions that should have resulted in his removal from office in any sane world and didn't really dent him very much. And I've continued to be bewildered by it ever since. And the only explanation I can give, and it's not honestly a flattering one to myself or people like me, is that a whole lot of people like me thought that the Republican Party was a whole lot of people like Kori Schake. And because I know there's a lot of partisan Democrats who are probably listening to this, and you're going to shake your head and say he's so naive and blah 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 blah. But bear with me for a minute. If I'm naive on this, I come by it honestly. You know, I've worked in this town for more than 25 years now, in a very nonpartisan fashion, and I've never thought of myself as having a strong political identification. And, you know, when the Bush administration was in power, I tried to do a lot of work with the Bush administration. When the Obama administration was in power, I did a lot of work with the Obama administration. And when you craft your policy and political identity that way, you have this working assumption that the parties are represented at some level by the professionals who staff the agencies and the congressional offices and the executive branch when those people are in power. And frankly, the law firms in my business, because, you know, I do a lot of work with lawyers. And so, like, if your sense of what the Republican Party is a whole lot of people who, by the way, with only a very small number of exceptions, turned out to be the Never Trump movement. That was my conservative circle were all people who almost all people who I didn't misjudge, actually. I got them right. It's just that they turned out to, no offense,
not be
Kori,
representative,
not represent anybody. You know, they were staffers often at a staffer, you know, remember the president's White House chief of staff is a staffer, right? So that's not a low-level position necessarily. They were the people who were staffing in professional contexts, very, very important jobs, but they had no political constituency. And Trump pulled the mask off from under that, from that. And he revealed that, first of all, that the Republican Party that Kori thought she was a part of didn't exist. And also the Republican professionalism that I thought I was interacting with, it's not that it didn't exist, it's that it had no home. And so that whole group of people is now in this wilderness, which Kori is much better positioned to place to describe than I am. But it also revealed that the base of the Republican Party was something that the institutional Republican Party had managed to contain for a very long time and was no longer able to contain. And I think we've seen something like that happen in Europe too, where lots of, you know, whether it's the AfD in Germany or the UKIP or the Brexit movement in Britain, you know, all of these countries have had these kind of base revolts, and the Republican Party has had one too. So yeah, the people who would rise up and say, this is unacceptable about Donald Trump, yeah, they all did it. And then the world shrugged and went on, and it turned out the real Republican Party didn't care. How unfair is that, Kori?
I don't think it's unfair. I think we didn't win the argument in 2016 about principled conservatism, and we didn't win it in 2019 either, and 2020 in the impeachment process. But I don't despair that we may yet win it. I actually think President Trump caught the crest of a wave of anxiety among conservatives about how rapid the rate of change was, how uncertain a future that technology and globalized economics were creating, and people not understanding what it was going to mean for them, what their place would be in that kind of future. and we didn't have political leaders who spoke to those issues. And so what you got was the kind of snarling anger of President Trump. I am more optimistic that what we are going to see is a repudiation, both by Republicans, but also by the broader voting American public, of what President Trump is bringing for the country, both the policies he is enacting, I should say, not just both, the policies he is enacting, the people he is appointing, and also the social forces he is unleashing. That I think those have to be repudiated for us to get back to a Republican Party that I recognize. But I don't lack confidence that the purification of fire is going to take us there.
Speaking of your finding a silver lining in any situation, I want the record to reflect that you just referred to a purification of fire by fire as a good thing.
I come from the wildfire country in Northern California.
I was gonna say, I was like, that's like, you know, you can sterilize a blade very easily on a flame, Ben. It's very true. Kori, I'm so glad that you were here with us today. Like, this has been amazing. You are amazing. And this is like, I've learned so much, and it's been kind of just a lovely episode. I was just telling Ben in a private chat to figure out who was going to wrap up. I was like, I start each of these kind of episodes and I don't know what to expect. And I'm a little bit tired and I'm like a little bit down about my day. And I end in such a more positive and happier place, but I don't think that's ever been quite as true as it was today. So thank you so much. You were a huge part of that. Thank you so much for coming on.
It was a great privilege to have this conversation with you both, Kate and Ben. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so what do we have for tomorrow, Kate?
Yeah, so tomorrow we have 2 ER doctors that are going to be joining us from either coast, one in Virginia and one in California, hopefully, that are going to be talking about what it's been like to be on the front lines of the coronavirus as an emergency room doctor. And I think that's going to be fascinating, not only in how they're seeing the coronavirus in front of them, but what this has meant globally for being a doctor in terms of the benefits and how the healthcare system is structured. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
Maybe we can ask them about masks.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that. We should totally ask them about masks. Yeah.
So before we go, I want to say a word about my shirt. So
the preamble to the Constitution.
Well, it's actually, I'm going to tilt it down. It's We the People Care. And I was giving a book talk with Susan in New York at Barnes and Noble's. And this lovely gentleman walked up to me and he said that he had been very offended by Melania Trump's wearing that vest or that jacket that said, "I really don't care, do you?" And so he had designed this We the People Care shirt in response.
That's lovely.
And he gave them to people and asked me whether I would take one. And so I very gratefully did. I was very moved by it. And I thought, what better day to wear it and what better place to wear it than on In Lieu of Fun. So shout out to the designer of the We the People Care shirt.
Yay!
And, we will
Way
be
to
back.
make me finally cry. It took 28 days.
We will be back.
Lovely.
We will be back tomorrow at 5. And remember, if you can't have fun in lieu of fun, you can still have us.
Bye, guys. See you later. Thanks, Kori.
Bye.